Hey guys, Jeff from Home Renovision here today working on our basement project, and I'm in the theater room right now. Today's video is all about painting. How to go in new construction from bare drywall that's primed to finishing off the project. What's the right order? What are all the tips? What are the pitfalls? How to solve your problems as you go, and little tricks that you can use to make yourself efficient, productive, and avoid costly mistakes. This one's for you. I'm gonna save your bacon and show you my secret to success, my top 10 tips so that you can have a perfect every time basement renovation paint job. Tip number one, of course, is do a prime check after you've done your drywall. Get your beige mud out or add some chalk, red or blue chalk line dust into your mud so that you can make a colorant. Mix it in and then go look for perfections. Use different kinds of lighting. Use direct light, use offset light. Do prime check in the morning and then do another one in the afternoon. This is not a process that you want to rush. New construction always has little problems. It's just the nature of the game. Even the drywall will come with dents that are predetermined just from the handling and shipping process. Once you've got all your prime check done, tip number two is you've got to sand your prime check. You've got to sand your walls. Now in this room, we did spray ceilings. We sanded in between 2 coats of spray. We sanded before we sprayed. The rule with paint in general is this: once it's dry, you sand it. Now the only time we don't sand is after the last coat is done. Every other time before you touch a wall, you sand. There's always dust, there's always imperfections, there's always a rough surface. And so the best paint jobs are finished by having a smooth surface before you start. Sanding is simple. Use an orbital sander, just like in our painting videos, right on the drywall, right on the primer. All right? And it's just a quick pass. Now, because this is new drywall, you also want to check it with your hand. Make sure, well, right there, that corner there is just the drywall paper and it had the paint sprayed. It's still a little rough. There's no mud there. It's just the nature of using a sprayer. There we go. Now it's smooth like a baby's bottom. Be picky. You're only gonna do this once, so be picky. You be the biggest critic in the room and you'll be happy with the job when you're done. Tip number 3 is all about your trim. Because when you're doing a project like this, you wanna put your flooring in first so that when you install your trim, you can install it right onto the floor and you don't have to add another piece of trim afterwards. Extra trim costs extra money, extra time, extra caulking, extra paint work, and you're always faced with the same dilemma, and that is you have to paint right up against the floor. In our system, what you do is you paint all of your baseboard first in another room, and then you install it, and your nails should always go in the middle of the board. That way, when you're all finished, said and done, and you have to paint the touch-ups, you only have to bring your brush or roller halfway down the board, because from here to here is already completely finished. That'll help you avoid the costly mistake of getting paint on your flooring and then having to scrape it up or clean it up. Remember, a lot of surfaces today, engineered hardwood even comes with water-based finishes, so you can't use acetone to take paint off of wood and be guaranteed you're not gonna have a problem. That's money in the bank. Now, tip number 3 you use for your baseboard and your casings. You don't wanna ever have a brush go anywhere near your flooring ever again. Tip number 4 is this: when you're trimming out your windows, use half-inch finished plywood. Use a top grade quality plywood that's super smooth, okay? It's easy to paint, easy to fill. And before you put the top piece of casing on, paint above it on the wall and cut your line. This enables you to add this trim and you'll guarantee you're gonna have room to get your brush in there without getting paint on the ceiling. This is easy to paint the surface only, and because you don't have to caulk in around the top or paint the top of that trim either. When you're meeting up with an old window, use a piece of trim. And if it's flush, use a square piece of trim that covers the gap. Because over time, if you rely on caulking only in that joint, it's gonna crack, it's gonna gap, because especially in a 4-season climate, expansion and contraction, caulking loses that battle every time. So always add a piece of trim to guarantee good results long term. Tip number 5. I've seen so many videos on the internet, people using tape to tape off their lines before they cut in and to cover their baseboards. Take this. It's of no use to you on new construction. If you want to avoid destroying your work, don't bring tape to it. Remember, paint takes 30 days to cure. So if you put tape on your baseboard to protect it from getting a little paint on it off the roller, you're going to peel off the paint. If you put paint around your ceiling to protect it from touching it with the roller when you're doing your walls, you take that tape off, you're going to rip the paint right off the ceiling. That's important. Tape is not your friend on new construction, it's your enemy. Now, if it's an older house and the paint's been there for years, sure, you can use tape. But why don't you just learn how to paint like a pro, because it saves you a lot of time and energy. Tip number 6 is this: when dealing with ceilings, if you use a sprayer, you're way ahead. You get a much nicer finish. There's never any lines on it. And I've got a video to show you how to do that. They rent those machines at the Home Depot. It's easy to use. You don't have to be overwhelmed with the concept of it. I know it's scary and new to a lot of people to use a sprayer, but if you watch that video, we'll put it in the video description. It'll make it a lot easier for you. There's really only 3 or 4 tricks you need to know to use a sprayer. But remember this: if you use a sprayer, you get a different texture on the finish. So then when you go to cut and roll your walls, unless you've got a steady hand and you've mastered the art, I'm gonna suggest don't use the sprayer. Although it looks better, if you use a sprayer and then you make a mistake and you need to do a touch-up, then that touch-up brush or roller mark is going to scream. It's going to say, I just got patched. So consider this. If you're not comfortable with your brushwork, cut and roll your ceilings, or at least use a brush around the edges and spray the rest, and know that it's going to look funny. But I would recommend brush and roller on a ceiling if you're not comfortable using painting without tape. If you are comfortable with it, then get the machine and spray your ceiling every single time. You got a decision to make. You've got two choices when it comes to painting your ceiling. Brush and roll or use the sprayer. If you brush and roll, it's a little bit safer if you make a mistake. If you use a sprayer, you've got to be perfect with your brush. Tip number 7, and I know you're only painting the wall, but cover all of the surfaces in the whole room. And if you've got furniture, cover them too, because there's nothing worse than going to sit down on a piece of furniture 2 or 3 weeks after a paint job, once the paint has cured, and finding a great big pink spot on your blue sofa. Buy tarps that are 4 feet by 15 feet long. Line the whole perimeter. Take a great big 12 by 15 and open it up in the room. I know. If you use good paint and you take your time when you're painting, you generally don't have a mistake. But that's why they call it mistakes, because they happen when you don't expect it. So make sure you cover everything up, protect your floors, and avoid the need to go around after you're done your job with a little piece of wet sandpaper trying to take the paint off the floor. Tip number 8 is all about how to solve your problems once you've got your first coat of paint on. So obviously, we got to do the first coat. While your patching is setting up and drying, it's a great time to hit your trim. In this particular case, the window was framed with unprimed wood, so I had to prime it. There's 1 coat of semi-gloss on the rest of this. Make sure every single joint, especially around windows, is caulked. Caulking everywhere, okay? And then you take your brush and you're gonna cut all the joints because the mini roller isn't gonna get in those joints. All right, and we're gonna just really get that all filled up nice. All right, then we're going to take our mini roller and we're going to apply all our flat surfaces. If you do the brushwork afterwards, like after the mini roller, you're not going to have the same texture, okay? So brush first and you can roll into the corners. And that'll change almost all the texture on that surface, and that is the best way to get that done. There we go. Now, same for up here. Let's finish this all the way to the other end. All right, and then cut that gap. There we are. Okay, you're gonna find that if you're using plywood like I did, you're gonna need a primer, 2 coats of your semi, possibly even 2 coats of primer, depending what primer you put on here. But you really wanna make sure that when all is said and done, it's perfect every time. Now here's a word of warning for you. When you're doing this, you can't put a coat on, wait an hour until it feels dry and then put a coat on. Nothing is sealing. Real wood will just keep on soaking up the moisture, and you're gonna be left with a product that doesn't look like it got painted, okay? Whoa, there's a trick for you. All right, get that right in the groove. Yeah. Here's the thing, if you do a primer and then a finish coat, let it sit 24 hours and then come back. Wait until it's actually set up and really dry, and then you put the next coat on, it'll sit on the surface without penetrating into the wood again. That's the secret to getting this done with one primer and 2 coats of finish. If you try to hurry and you're moving along too fast and trying to do all the coats in one day, you'll come back the next day, you'll be disappointed, and you'll have to do another coat. So the process is simple, guys, right? Dust it. If you don't have a duster, grab an old brush that's getting clogged up with an acrylic. I like to just buy a cheap square brush. And then we're going to hit our drywall primer, cut it right down onto the baseboard. And I'll tell you, the process here is simple. I'm going to walk you through this. I paint the baseboard 1 coat. I use a caulking bead. We do a coat on the wall. We find our mistakes. We fix them. We prime them. And then we're going to paint them. And when it's all said and done, the process works like this. You paint all your door casing and window casing. Then you do your second coat on your wall. And then you come back and you do the last coat on your baseboard. I'm going to show you this and how easy this is. And I know everybody has this issue. Oh, some guys are commenting on channels in the past and they're like, we don't believe in that. We like to put green tape here. I like to paint my baseboards first and then protect it with tape. Listen, when you're cutting and you've got a wall surface to cut, I got 4 inches that I can fool around with here to get a perfect line. When I'm working with just a baseboard, that's a ½ an inch thick. One little mistake, it's all up the wall. Do things in order that give you the most mercy. Do all your casings first, and then use your wall to push your brush and to draw your line around your casing. Draw all your wall and do it all your wall up against your baseboard. And at the very, very end, you come back and use the baseboard. You can set your brush, and you can use just a little bit of the brush to make the cut line. I'm gonna show you that in just a second. Once all your patches are dry, you give them a quick sand, and then you gotta prime them. We're going right back to when we finished our first coat. I have never been on a job that we sanded, primed, prime checked, did a first coat, and we were happy with the first coat. Never been on one. And you might think, oh, that's because you're a lousy drywall taper, Jeff. I'm like, no, it's just because once you add the paint, you change the way the light bounces around the room, and you're gonna see things that you didn't see before. And if you don't believe me, that's just the way it is. That's just a law of painting. You're just not going to get a perfect job unless you put the time and energy in to be critical about your work after you get your first coat on. If you're not critical, yeah, it'll look great. Most homeowners I know are trying to do the best job possible, so that requires being critical. The reason we're using the primer is because we don't want to waste our money. If I prime just the spot that I did this with, and then I come back with a mini roller with the wall paint, I'm only using an ounce or so of paint. But if I don't prime and I just use the wall paint to cover it up and go, oh, that's good enough, what's going to happen is you're going to finish your second coat, and then you're gonna see all those patches on the wall. And then you're gonna have to do a whole third coat. That'll cost you another gallon. And in today's market, a good gallon of paint runs you almost 100 bucks. Do the couple ounces, prime it, let it dry. I know it's an extra step, but it works, and it'll save you money in the long run. Now, here's the process. Last day of new construction. We're gonna be sanding these walls. So before we get the sanding of the walls, we wanna get our primed patch, wall color, this back to first coat. All right, now I don't have to worry about little wispy tails and stuff like that. I don't even have to worry about great coverage. When you have a good quality paint, you're gonna be just fine with a mini roller. The secret here, just get all this done. Give this about an hour to set up before you paint the walls. And if you get a lint on the wall, hey, here we go. Get rid of that now. Don't leave lint on the wall when you're finishing off the primer like this. Because when you sand that back, it'll leave another white spot. All right, all I gotta do when I go to paint this wall now is I'll start with the cut line down there on the bottom and then start on that wall and come around the room. By the time I get back to here, this wall will be nice and dry. Piece of cake. All right, last step, of course, is your sanding pole. People ask me all the time, what's the grit that I use on the paper? The thickest you wanna use is 220. Go up to 400 if you want. Again, you can feel the roughness after the first coat. And if you get really, really close, you'll see a bunch of little white dots appearing in the paint. That is the roughness smoothed off. That's what you're gonna have, and that's okay. The second coat's gonna cover all of that. So all you need to know now, guys, if you got 2 coats, you sand in between coats, you're gonna need a duster, and that's an older brush, okay? Clean any dust off the baseboards from that sanding environment. And the last thing you need to do is cut a line on your trim with the brush. You can see the edge. Set the brush up against right in that gap of the wall. And there we go. That's it. Cheers to next time.